gentlemen, all the way from sunny August London, where we now have hailstorms because that's a thing that happens in the 21st century. Global climate change, maybe it is a thing, right? Anyway, gather your botherers, get your Care Bear buggerers, cut together you dirty mingers, because this dial M for motherfucker. It is Mondo Murder Party! Alright, how's you? Welcome to the show. It is nice to be on this side of midnight for a change. Right, I need to pop open another window so I can see if other people are asking me anything. Possibly not, who knows? Right, I don't know, doesn't look like there's anybody here. Doesn't matter. We'll do the show regardless, and hopefully those of you will join in as and when. Right, so the main reason for this particular show, beyond Mondo Funny Books is moving to Tuesday night, right? So, for all of you who weren't aware, Mondo Funny Books, Tuesday night. Simple as. Right, tonight's show is in honour of the upcoming graphic novel, Did You Hear What Eddie Gein Done? Which is drawn by Eric Powell and written by Harold Schachter. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. There are different delivery dates depending on where you look. The comic sites are saying the 15th of August and Amazon is saying the 24th of August. So maybe it's different where they've staggered it out, where the comic shops get the first point and then Amazon gets it a few weeks later. But nonetheless, by the end of the month, Did You Hear What Eddie Gein Done will be out. I've been looking forward to this for a bit since it was first announced. God blimey, a while back now. You're going to have to forgive me because I'm having problems with my shoelaces. I just had to brave the rain to get some more cans and fags and that. Right, there you go. Much better, much comfier. So, Did You Hear What Eddie Gein Done is, from what I've seen from the preview art on their Kickstarter, I'll put a link to the Kickstarter at the end of the show, so even though the book's fully funded and is obviously on the way, you might be able to, I don't know, scoop up some of the bonus tier packages. I'm obviously a big fan of Eric Powell. I've mentioned The Goon and Chimichanga quite frequently. But for those of you who haven't seen his work before, let's give you a new one with the mini series he drew for Image a few years back, which is Big Man Plans. The the violent escapades of a Vietnam veteran who also happens to be a dwarf, hence the amusing name Big Man Plans, where the plan is that he gets his revenge. Right, what can we do about cause? Oh, like, no, actually, okay. So yeah, lots of moribund violence. Oh, I keep on forgetting Facebook mirrors the camera, doesn't it? So everything I do is counterintuitive. But yeah, if you've not seen Eric's stuff before, you should read any of it. The bloke combines like a Will Elder level of slapstick with burlesque and moody, kind of not quite David Lynch. It's a bit more slapstick than that, but his kind of tones and his subtexts and that kind of thing tend to veer towards the moody. Also, you know, as a wee fella who shouts knife to the eye while hitting someone. And I'm trying to look at the camera, and do you know what, I'm going to give up. I'm just going to have to hope I'm looking at the right place, but trying to keep an eye on the camera also looks like I'm looking at the bottom right of the screen, which is weird. So I'm going to look face on and hope it looks right, and if not, you can just assume I'm off kilter. Right, so a couple of things to clarify. Obviously, after the pushback, I think is the modern vernacular for it, there was a bit of concern, am I drinking again? No, not drinking again. I was doing it as part of a skit. It was a real can, however, I am so good at being teetotal that I can knock back half a Jack Daniels and Coke and then just go, right, I'm done with that, finished, end. So yes, please don't worry. Wow, 0 viewers, fantastic. It's fine. I just talk to myself all the time now anyway. It's one of the things that's come about with lockdown. It's just I'm just gonna babble to myself, don't care. So yeah, the other thing obviously besides Big Man Plans is The Goon. If you want a good place to start with The Goon, then Volume 0 is quite a good place because it is called Rough Stuff and it is a collection, it's a collection of the bits and pieces published by Avatar and Albatross before the game was picked up by Dark Horse. So instead of paying stupid amounts of money on eBay for all the rarities and the colour special, just grab this. As far as I'm aware, it's in print. It's, if not, just get it off Comixology or Kindle or something. It's well worth it. I'm sure that there are sample pages on Kindle, on Dark Horse Digital, where you can have a look through and go, oh, actually that is quite funny. I will have a laugh. So, the Ed Gein book, obviously something I'm looking forward to, hence this show, but it's one more of a number of quite interesting projects that have come about via Kickstarter. And I have been very intrigued to watch the evolution of what gets published now that Kickstarter is obviously a real factor in the nature of that. And the thing it reminds me of the most of, and you'll have to bear with me, right, is it reminds me of Tundra. Now, for the uninitiated, you may, well, I mean, there's no reason why anybody born after the turn of the century should have heard of Tundra, really. But Tundra was a comic company formed by Kevin Eastman of Eastman and Laird fame. You will know their most famous creation once I say it, which is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Right now, so obviously the Turtles was a huge thing, huge Pokemon levels of big at one point, and generated an absolute metric fuck ton of money. So what happened was Kevin Eastman had heard so many horror stories from comic creators who were like, I've got this really cool project I want to do, but the person at Epic, at Marvel, at DC, at Piranha, whatever, they're not willing to run with it. And obviously Eastman and Laird had their own issues with Marvel because Marvel kicked in and tried to say, hey, would you like us to publish the Turtles for you? And they're like, oh, well, what's the deal? I can't remember exactly what the deal was, but I think it was something like Marvel own it and you get 50%, or something equally patronising. Obviously, they didn't take it, because why would they? Do you know what I mean? Like, if you look back, as I do frequently, on the amount of just merch that the Turtles generated, figures, cartoons, videos of those cartoons, pizza, hang gliders, t-shirts, everything, the whole kit and caboodle. It was a multi-million-dollar powerhouse of merchandising. And Eastman decided, well, look, I've obviously done extremely well out of the comics industry, and the market seems to be flooded with all kinds of crap. Things like adolescent radioactive mutant hamsters, or some like things like that, like free adjectives and a noun based creatures just desperately trying to cash in. They were like the variant covers, or the comic artists who are breaking into the business doing a Rob Liefeld or New Mutants 98 or Tom McFarlane Amazing Spider-Man 300 knockoff, right? It was just the riding on the coattails of a successful thing that the least successful always feel inclined to do because they don't have any ideas of their own. True story. Much like the black and white boom that was subsequent to the existence of Cerebus, where, you know, lots of people went, well, it's in black and white, it's on crappy paper. I can do that. It's like, actually, you can't. There's quite a lot going on in things like that that require a degree of imagination beyond the superficial elements. So, born of the idea that corporate editors are a terrible and horrible lot, Eastman basically runs Tundra like a comic creator's credit card. Do you know what I mean? It was an insane amount of spending, so much money being put into projects that for various reasons would never manifest, or would manifest in bits or extremely infrequently. I think probably the most famous Tundra project was Big Numbers by Alan Moore and Bill Sienkiewicz, which never finished for various reasons. I think, you know, if you were going to say what's the prime tangible asset that Tundra created, it would probably be those first two issues of Big Numbers. I think there was a Baron story thing. There may have been, and I know he's the sort of person who gets angry if you get the facts wrong. I think Tundra produced the Sweeney Todd comic by Neil Gaiman and Stephen Bissett. But yeah, beyond that, I don't think, without looking it up, that they created like 3 dozen comics. I could be wrong, maybe 50. Not much beyond that. And for the millions that went into Tundra. At one point, they had a press release for the UK office of Tundra, at the National History Museum in South Kensington. They booked the Natural History Museum. That's not cheap. People more on the inside of Tundra probably have different angles and more pragmatic, more intelligent reasons for why what happened. I cannot get my head past. We have an office in the UK based on the publication of almost zero comics as a kind of R&D department, and to publicise this entity, we're going to book the Natural History Museum? That's great. I can't even imagine what that costs. Anyway, the point is, Eastman's ethos was, you tell me what your dream project is. You tell me what it is that, if you were unhindered by editorial interference, if you did not have to slug it out doing 12 issues or 15 issues of Avengers a year, or you didn't need to suck up to the right editor, you tell me what that dream project is, and I will fund it, and I will advance you the money. So you can just get on with it, unhindered by the pragmatic realities of the world that would stop this otherwise. And that seems to be the natural predecessor to Kickstarter, I guess, where you build up enough cachet, such as, what's her name? Shelley Bond, for example, incredibly strong reputation as one of the premier editors in comics of the last 20 years, or 30 years now, has enough prestige to say, I'm going to do a book about the nature of my time editing and some professional tips that you can take away. And here is a list of talent I've worked with who are also going to contribute strips and tips and all kinds of other bits. Give me money and I will produce it. And lo and behold, it's happening. Filth and Grammar, I think it's still in the being funded stage, but certainly quite a way along. Obviously you've got John McCrea, who's been doing The Mighty World of McCrea via his Kickstarter. Has been very successful as far as I can see. So yeah, it's an intriguing middle ground. Because the two extremes, I believe, are thus. A, you have the comic retail side. Retailers are, because of the nature of non-returnable product, naturally cautious. They especially now, especially in the UK post-Brexit, where every penny has to turn something over very quickly. So the room for experimental books, I would imagine, has diminished quite significantly. Okay, so if it ain't selling this week, you've overordered, is probably, I would think, where they are. There's not a lot of here's a Bulgarian dude with one leg doing like comics about his dreams and he's drawing it on charcoal or whatever. So yeah, like, that's not really an option anymore. And on the other end is the desire to absolutely abandon the physical realm entirely and go digital, which is, I think it depends where you're starting from if you're going digital, to be honest. I think if you are someone who has already made their name, who already has several books in print and has a guaranteed income, regardless of what your next project is, then yeah, maybe digital is the best place to go. But that's not as many people as you would think. Do you know what I mean? Like, Frank Miller could probably do it. Alan Moore could probably do it. Mark Miller could probably do it. Beyond that, maybe not so many. You know what I mean? Like, you'd really have to be not only at the upper echelons of the industry to have such a strong name, to draw people away from the physical realm into your own digital project, but then you'd need it to not turn a profit. You'd have to go in saying the first couple of years we're not going to make any money on this because people aren't going to think about it. In fact, Alan Moore did try something called Electra Comics a few years back, which I don't believe exists anymore. So yeah, I'm not saying that the realm of the digital is absolutely a no-go place. I think it is, at the moment, very much a place for the privileged and the established. And if I were a comic creator, unless I were really good at social media or are really good at attracting attention, I wouldn't start from there, because if 100 people are viewing your project, maybe one of them will, I don't know, kick in with some money. So you're going to have your own money to do it if you're going to be digital, I think. I could be wrong. People who've spent more time in the digital wars have, you know, probably got more different experiences. I'm telling you as somebody from the outside looking in these days. But for Kickstarter, it's basically, you know, the removal of that middleman for a comic creator to say, I want to do this. This is what it will look like. This is what you'll get. If you give me this much money towards it, you can have this. But yeah, and I like that freedom. I like the idea of things being... I like the idea of creators having to not essentially, you know, stalk a Marvel editor in a pub until, you know, that editor finally gives them work, for the lack of not seeing their face every time they go out to relax. Because, you know, you're an editor, like any other human being. If you're going out to relax, you're going out to relax. You're not there to necessarily to have some dude schmooze it. You know, it's pretty low state of affairs, I think, and fairly disingenuous also, because you're like, yeah, you know, you don't care who the editor is. You know them as a facilitator. You know them as someone who could get you work. So who they are, it doesn't matter. Which is why I'm really probably not that famous in comic books, lots of reasons. But I'm not very good at schmoozing. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care what end of the echelon of the spectrum you're on. I get on with you or I don't. I'm not very good at sucking up, and I think there's almost a prostitution of a talent to hang around poor innocent people who are just trying to have a drink and saying, here's my amazing script for here's what I'd do with Squirrel Girl, you know. Like, I'm just trying to drink, mate. I'm not on the job. There is a process for submitting ideas. Anyway, that aside. So one of the things that Kickstarter obviously allows you to do is to design your project, to say it's going to be this format. Now again, we've got another shift in the balance, right? Because up until maybe 10, maybe 15 years ago, there was a very firm tradition with comics that they need to resemble, give me a sec. They basically need to be this shape, the traditional comic size, so it can fit in with the already designed shelving and stuff. And anything outside of that, bigger or smaller or wider or taller, is going to be an aberration. And the consumer is a naturally conservative person, and if it goes outside of what they want, they won't buy it. If they're not going to buy it, then the retailer doesn't want to have to adjust the shop to accommodate these aberrations of the format, right? But then, well, in my lifetime, the biggest break to all of that was Chris Ware. Chris Ware did a series called Acme Novelty Library, which was in many different formats and sizes and shapes. And apparently the retailer pushback was so strong that, like, Fantagraphics created a special paper shelving unit that was sent out to various retailers and said, here, put that up, put the comics in there. Don't know how much of a difference it made, but it was notable. And in the 90s, where people were, you know, throwing money at anything and everything, you know, was being published, you had lots of different formats. Big Numbers was the size of a 12-inch shingle. What else did you have? Obviously, Barry Windsor Smith's Storyteller was a huge book. And I think because, I mean, this is off the back of me watching the really horrible, desperate social media grass where Marvel like we're doing our first NFTs. I was like, wow, you finally found the way to make the comic creator completely irrelevant to your product. Like, great. I don't know what else to say about NFTs except a fool and his money is soon parted. I mean, okay, cool. It generates a lot of money. It has literally nothing to do with the form or the potential of storytelling or any experimentation or anything that would change the landscape and the relationship between creator and retailer and reader and publisher. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, it's like fucking high-end pogs. Do you know what I mean? I hope the people involved make a lot of money, but it's absolutely irrelevant to the things that I am interested to do with the comics form. But speaking of the comics form, this is a question I still get in my old age. So I'm posting this on the I Create Comics group, so if you guys are watching this via this, thank you for sitting through my previous babble for me to get to this point. Even like really highly noted comic creator asked me this over the weekend, in fact. And the question is, okay, so having said what I've just said about the conservative nature of the comic shop, well, I don't know how much the comic shop in its current form should be a consideration anymore, is my honest take on it. Because of the reasons I've stated, because of the desire to turn things around very, very quickly. I think if you have a more direct relationship with your reader via Kickstarter, then you can say, look, I want to do this. And that was, I think, that was a longer version of the answer I gave to the person in question. But the real answer is, personally speaking, I think if you're soliciting opinions on format, you have your idea the wrong way up. I don't integrate myself into the relationship between consumer and creator. I don't think, me personally, if Michael T. Gilbert, a guy I really like, who does Mr. Monster, messaged me and said, I'm doing a new Mr. Monster book, would you prefer it if it was wide or tall? I'd be like, why are you asking me? Because one, I'm only one person. And for your comic to make any money, you're going to have to be selling several thousand copies. So, are you going to accommodate each person's answer, or are you going to do a mean average of, or you're just going to go with however many people said yes the most? Because then you run the risk of potentially alienating everyone who says, well, I want this format, but you've said, well, you didn't vote enough to get it. I mean, to me, it's your comic. Do you know what I mean? Like, work this out for yourself. Because my answer is, look, if I believe in your work, I don't care if you're doing a regular size graphic novel, I don't care if you're doing a giant newspaper, I don't care if you're doing a comic strip sized book, or this kind of thing, or you're doing it as a digest book, or a ashcan shaped book. This one's for Amber, by the way, because I figured the Henry and Glenn comic, you'd probably like that. You'll like this if you don't know about it, Amber, check it out. Or if you're doing like a Mars Attack comic, but this is size, or you're doing this shaped chunk thing that you can use as a doorstop, or you're Jeff Darrow and you're doing this Kafunga big guy and the Rusty the Boy Robot. As far as I'm concerned, right, it's your work. You tell me I'm doing this, and if I'm interested, I'll fund it. And one of the best things and examples of this freedom to not be bound by the constrictions of the desires and preferences of the comic shop is... Oh, had me vitamins before I took this. Oh. This is the Locust Moon book that was done by a Kickstarter. It's called Little Nemo Dream Another Dream. To give you some perspective, if I can, regular size comic... I don't even know if it's going to fit on the screen. Right. I'm working counterintuitively, aren't I? So, do that, then that should come up. Ah, there you go. So the Goon book is a regular size comic, right? And there's about 2 or 3 inches of space. So yeah, that's the 2 of them side by side. So if I come all the way down, that's how big this damn book is. And it is a collection of people doing their own interpretations of the book, because he said, hey look, we're doing this, right? So I say, do what you want, alright? And if I believe in your work, I'll be there for it. And if you don't, or if I don't like your work, there is nothing you could do to your format. There is nothing you could do with your font. There's nothing you could do to the plot or to change the characters. I don't care about that superficial stuff. Paul Pope says I'm doing a book about 2 old men playing chess at the turn of the century. Alright, Paul Pope, I'm in. Like, that's it. That everything else is superficial. Jamie Hernandez says I'm doing a book based on a book of drawings of mock-up wrestling magazines based on my wrestling comics. You're the man, Jamie. You tell me. You tell me what you're doing, and I either believe in you or I don't. I appear to have notifications. Maybe somebody is actually watching this. Who knows? Leo is watching. We are up to a viewer. Woohoo! Yep, I'm live. Nobody has any questions. Well, that's right. I wasn't planning to do a huge show anyway. So, to round things off, because I didn't fancy doing all-nighter, I'm just quite enjoying chatting to you guys on this side of midnight. It's not a dig at anyone, it's just, you know, regular human being. Yeah, I want to pull out something a bit special I found over the weekend. Some of you know it's been a bit rough over at the House of Cole in the last couple of weeks. My neck gave out, I had a really bad bout of depression, then I thought I had COVID, then I had to explain to everyone that no, I didn't have COVID, I'm just an idiot who can't read test results, just to exacerbate once again, I do not have COVID. Oh, and by the way, to the dickhead who messaged me and said, was you saying you had COVID part of the whole storyline that you were doing? I was like, no, fuckhead. Like, there are degrees of heat, and even I would not actually make up the idea that I have COVID just to generate some heat for a storyline, because that's really crap. But I did notice you blocked me after you answered the question, so maybe you'll see this down the line, and you'll hear me calling you a dickhead. But yeah, obviously things are a bit awkward over the weekend with the whole cancelling the It All Starts Here storyline. But beyond that, like, I think things have settled down now. Do you know what I mean? Like, all the important issues are kind of dealt with, and anything else, I think, is kind of, like, it's not really a big deal. Like, you know, there might be a few bits of resentment that have been unmentioned to me, but, you know what I mean, man? Like, the Eagles don't care about the cawing of the crows. That would be crazy to do that. So, we finish. Because, as I was saying, I was having a ruffle through the comics. I finally sat down, after years and years and years, with my copies of Death Rattle. Death Rattle was an anthology much in the style of things like Bruce Jones's Twisted Tales or Alien Worlds. It's probably most famous, this is part of Volume 2, for introducing Xenozoic Tales to the world, back in issue 8 by Mark Schultz. Xenozoic Tales is probably better known to everyone as Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. which even became a Capcom fighting game, which is really odd. Like, it's like how far, like, it's quite weird to go back to the 90s and go, how many video games were based on, like, odd and obtuse comics anyway? So, this, but my main discovery from this Death Rattle, beyond the work of Randa Holmes, I've only just found out about, but now I absolutely love. He's like the middle ground between Mitch O'Connell and Ross Meyer and Wally Wood, like all kinds of just lurid, bosomy dinosaur murder goodness. So quite enjoying his stuff. I like. It's one of the cool things about not claiming to be an expert, that you always learn about new stuff. There's treasure everywhere, as Calvin and Hobbes famously stated. And even if I never buy a comic again, like the amount of stuff I just haven't read and don't know about and go learning about is great. So, yes, Death Rattle, a really good anthology, very experimental, brings about certain connotations, but they're beyond, like, there's an underlying aesthetic. Like, they're the middle ground between the independents and the undergrounds. You get guys like Spain and Stephen Bissett in there. And you also get stuff by Mark Schultz, who's obviously very much from the Alex Raymond and Hal Foster school of artwork. So you'd always get something interesting. There's even a Frank Miller issue. There's an issue that has some lost pages from the original Crow comic by James O'Barr. So each issue is going to have something interesting in it. But this issue in particular, by just happenstance, and the thing that inspired this episode in the first place, has an essay by Dave Schreiner called Ed Gein and the Left Hand of God. What else is in this issue? So this is issue 7, by the way, for those of you who may have never read their copy, because it took me forever. I don't even know why I didn't read these. So, as I know some of the audience used to like the readings, and they're quite a relaxing thing to do, and maybe I can just segue this bit out of the original video and release it as its own thing. Settle down, make a cup of tea, as I believe a famous person once said, as I regale ye with a tale of the long box and tap. This is from Death Rattle number 7, and it is by Dave Schreiner. It's called Ed Gein and the Left Hand of God. In the broad, rough rectangle called the United States, an area known as Wisconsin lays like God's amputated left hand, palm down and at the top and in the center of the nation. At the western little finger border of the hand, the Mississippi River begins its long snaking run south. It starts as a wound in upper Minnesota, a clean, bubbling freshet you can jump across, and by the time it runs past Wisconsin, it has grown to a wide, ambling flow. After it incorporates the main arteries of the Ohio in Cairo, Illinois, the Missouri in St. Louis, and many others from many states, the combined currents become treacherous. At least once a year this pulsing river swells and floods, and then it surges heavy and unpredictable through the port of New Orleans to the sea. At the top and on the entire eastern edge of Wisconsin, the Great Lakes lay like a cosmic plasmic splatter, with the thumb of the left hand resting in Lake Michigan. The hand itself, the state, can be conveniently divided for our purposes into 2 parts. There is a lower southeastern triangle, bordered by Milwaukee on the east, Madison 75 miles to the west, and Illinois to the south. There are other cities scattered in the state, but the population of Wisconsin mostly resides in this triangle. In the south there is industry, political centers, urban amenities, and urban crime. And then there's the rest of the state. In the north there is nothing much now but scenery. It is this much larger portion of Wisconsin that concerns us. In the old days before and after statehood in 1848, big money was made in the north. In the late 17th century, the French explored and named Wisconsin, taking it from the Indian word Miskosing, or hole of the muskrat. The French were looking for the elusive northwest passage to the Orient, but it found instead a rich territory but abundant in fur-bearing animals. They birthed a lucrative market for any animal product that would sell, concentrating on beaver, wolf and fox pelts. They established trading agreements with the Indians, which helped ensure that the Indians would supply most of the manpower during the French and Indian War of the English in the 1760s. The French lost that war and the English became the nominal rulers of the territory. The Nouveau Americans secured the area after the War of 1812. During this entire span of time, the trapping and trading went on, and to everyone's surprise, the animals were, for the most part, disappearing. In the 1820s, a lead rush occurred in the northeastern corner of the state, and soon mines and towers for the manufacture of rifle shot dotted the landscape up there. Immigrants came from the Cornwall mining region in England, then from Germany and Scandinavia. By 1836, enough people had been attracted by the mines to allow the region to become an official territory. By 1860, the ore had played out to the extent that the mining was only profitable in time of conflict, and after the Civil War, the mining counties became scarred, depopulated, depressed areas. It was then that logging came into its heyday. Practiced from the early 1800s, the timber industry suddenly became a boom venture when the railroads were able to penetrate the territory's interior in the late 1860s. Lumber could now be shipped to a building nation. From that time to the early 1900s, big money was to be made in the vast forests that covered over 2/3 of the state. It was a time of entrepreneurs and brawny lumberjacks, a time when the legend of Paul Bunyan could start in Wisconsin. But the trees were gone in 40 years. So the speculators were left to go rape California, Idaho, Oregon and Washington. The lumberjacks went with them, or became farmers. The disastrous Peshego forest fire played its part in denuding the land, the worst natural disaster to ever hit Wisconsin, and possibly the worst forest fire of all time anywhere. It raged over 1.25 million acres, destroyed an estimated 2 billion trees, killed 1,500 and left 8 northern counties devastated. It reached its peak on the night of October 8th, 1871, where it roared through Peshtigo. The flames superheated the air and consumed the oxygen, outran wildlife and atomized people. Nothing was left in its wake. A westerly gale fed it. The same gale helped level Chicago the same night. Chicago's toll was much less than Peshtigo's, and because Chicago was a shipping center, a railhead for the country, it soon recovered and became an industrial power. In Wisconsin's north, in Peshtigo, in other small towns, there was only ash and mourners. And through it all, those who stayed through the progression of boom and bust tried farming. That was nearly hopeless though. The soil is sandy and stony, not fit for prosperity. Life on the farm was not idyllic. Hamlin Garland wrote naturalistic stories about isolation and deprivation, about heartbreak and degeneration, about humans living like animals out in the wild. For some it was too much. They drank carbolic acid or potato bug poison or hung themselves from the beams of the barns that they had just put to the torch. And some of them cursed God and wouldn't die and hung on by scratching potatoes out of the stand and growing scrub firs for the Christmas trade. They supplemented this by hunting and fishing, or guiding hunters and fishermen. Deer and bear were still plentiful, but these third-generation immigrants would not learn, and soon there were very few bear. But there is beauty in the north. The inland lakes were gouged into being by the advancing Canadian glacier in the last ice age, and the rolling hills were deposited by its retreat. It seems that no matter what temporary human indignities are inflicted on the land, it can, if left alone, return to its natural state. So with the deer, fish and scenery as a law, and with the invention of the automobile, the settlers finally hit upon a relatively non-destructive way to make at least seasonal money. Tourism. And that's the way they make a living up there today. All this background has a bearing on the story. In many ways, the events that happened in 1957 in a small Wisconsin settlement are inexplicable. Mystery still surrounds some of the facts of the case. So much that what happened has mixed with speculation and legend to become folklore. Perhaps a look at a region's background can help the understanding of a bizarre occurrence in that region, perhaps not. Yet the terrible incidents of 1957 did not happen in a vacuum, and it's possible that the area and its people played some small role in the scenario, however unwittingly. The people of Wisconsin are not so remarkable that they stand as a breed apart from everybody else. Politically they like mavericks. The only things Robert M. Fighting Bob La Follette, Joseph R. Tailgunner Joe McCarthy, and William Golden Fleece Proxmire have in common are that they all held the same US Senate state from Wisconsin, and they all bucked the system. The natives liked the prestige and the sense of progress La Follette brought to Wisconsin through his fights for reform. My frame rate is too low. Oh. They knew McCarthy was a buffoon and dangerous, but they voted for him because he was colourful, catered to their fears, and sneered at pointy-headed intellectuals. When he died, they elected one of those intellectuals to replace him, with the understanding that this one give the government spendthrift Billy hell. Generally, Wisconsinites are subject to all the prejudices, and they also can be noble in that word's best sense. In the Civil War, the state was filled with people who had emigrated from foreign lands to escape conscription. After a few riots, the citizens served with honour. For many of the German migrants, World War I was the real Civil War, and they opposed entry right up until 1917. Then they sent more volunteers over there than any other state. Today, there are pockets of right-wing survivalists. The most famous recent example being the Posse Comitatus, who sought to declare their trailer park of Tigerton Dells an independent state. A comedy for sure, but when they were raised by the state, automatic weapons and dynamite were found, and later one of their peripheral members shot and killed 2 members of the government in South Dakota, and died himself in a siege down south. There are also pockets of socialists, remnants and descendants of a Milwaukee party that elected mayors up until the 1960s. The neighbours can be provincial, they can be poor, they will trust you implicitly if they know you well enough, but even if you are a stranger and in some kind of trouble, they will help you to the fullest extent that they can. Assistance to stranded motorists, especially in bad weather, is something that is taken for granted in Wisconsin, but for all that they mind their own business, even in the small towns. They can be solitary, especially in the north. Winter is no help to this situation. It can be hard and downright painful to get around, so there's nothing casual about travel, particularly if we're out in the country. In winter, the mind will play strange tricks if your only companions are the howling wind and the dropping temperature. Strange noises magnify themselves into something threatening. H.P. Lovecraft lived for a while in Wisconsin. He knew what it was all about, and if it isn't winter's wind that will make you apprehensive, it might be winter's silence. You can get to know the good and bad sides of yourself if you're cut off from people, and the wind is down and the snow muffles all sounds. So if you are not, to put it delicately, the most stable of humans to begin with, things can happen out in this great giant isolation ward the natives all call up north. It is an isolated spot that is the centre of this story. The place is labelled Wastora County, another Indian name in a state filled with them. It rests about a third of a state a length from the Illinois line, about where the third knuckle of the middle finger would be on that palm down left hand. The county seat is Wautoma, a small resort town that apparently became the governmental hub because 6 state and county roads ran directly through it from 6 directions, meeting as one in the centre of town. Outside that there are unincorporated villages and settlements in the county, among them Poisippi, Saxeville, Wild Rose, Red Granite, Lowerville, West Bloomfield and Plainfield. Plainfield. Now there's an American name for you. Midwestern, humble yet very descriptive. The plain in Plainfield refers to the beginnings of Wisconsin's prairie land that will join the Illinois and Iowa parcels and stretch south and west to the Rocky Mountains, but really, Plainfield is still basically out in the woods. There are over 800 people living there now. In 1957 there were just a few over 600 and growing smaller. Plainfield seems to be in the middle of nowhere. A single black-topped county road is its main street, so they don't have trouble with kids hanging around street corners. because there aren't any street corners, and there aren't any kids. Plainfield has a couple of churches, a hardware store, a few taverns, a food market, a lunch counter, a garage. Some of the taverns are adorned with trophy fish and deer heads. Tapestries depicting mighty bucks are used instead of girly pin-ups. Good deer art, they call it. In 1957, there were a couple of part-time police auxiliary officers who had no special training and whose only real work was taking care of Saturday night drunks. During the deer hunting season, the population of Washoe County just about triples, but the county sheriff's department and the state patrol are all the area usually needs to protect and preserve the public peace. The story takes place at the beginning of Wisconsin's 2-week deer hunting season with guns. The state schedules the season to hopefully coincide with the first heavy cold and snow of late autumn. This generally happens near mid-November. The state does this so hunters can track the animals in the snow, and because the first persistent cold of the year mark the time when deers begin to rut. Always silent, but blessed with sharp eyes and noses, wary to an extreme unless they get near a highway, able to blend perfectly in forest surroundings. When deer go into heat, they get a bit exhilarated. Unless you are behind the wheel, they are at no time reckless around humans, especially those with banging guns. But at mating times, bucks tend to get preoccupied with defending territory and looking for doe. If you want to get the drop on an unwary deer, November is your best chance. The deer's edge comes down to this. There are thousands of hunters combing the woods, and they're not the French voyagers of old. They're heavy-bellied brood workers and sedentary office supervisors. During deer season, the hunters are a bit exhilarated themselves, living a fantasy of frontier life and maybe taking a drop or two to ward off the cold. The woods are alive with the sounds of 30-30s, and the forest and cornfields are a dangerous place for anything to be, not just deer. A lot of cardiac-cased Daniel Boones count on the trees to stop any errant slugs. Up to a dozen or more times a season this ploy will not work, and a near-frozen hunter with a 2-inch piece of metal through a vital organ is dragged from the wild to a local funeral parlour. And there is always a subtle but definite blood smell in the Wisconsin winds in cold November. The winter of 1957 started in autumn. It got cold and stayed that way. There were 3 inches of new snow on the ground on Saturday, November. Right, it was opening day, and the hunting grounds would be less crowded during the week. Frank checked in at the gas station across the street from the store. The station was a checking facility where hunters registered their deer after the kill, as the state likes to keep a tally of these things. A number of animals gutted in the woods were hanging in the yards, and Frank learned from the attendant that Warden's Hardware had been closed since Frank learned from the attendant that Warden's Hardware had been closed since early this morning, and that was odd. He had expected to meet his mother, Bernice Warden, who was 58, at the store. It was not unusual for her to close the store when she made deliveries in a panel truck, and the station attendant said that he had seen the truck drive off at around 9:30 that morning. But she had not come back, and that was out of the ordinary. She was a widow and the actual owner of Warden's Hardware and Implement, and Saturday was always a busy day, so where could she have gone? The lights were burning in the store, and Frank went back home and got a key. What he found when he opened the store's glass door lit a small firecracker of an explosive chain that would detonate over the nation. Frank Warden discovered that his cash register was missing. On the floor near the counter where the register normally sat, he saw a small patch of dried reddish-brown fluid. It was blood, either animal or human. Warden's growing sense of apprehension was blossoming into dread. He next discovered 2 bills of sale that his mother had written that morning, the first for some stovepipe and the second for half a gallon of automotive antifreeze. The latter was only partly filled out, but the name of the customer was there, Ed Gein. Warden of course knew Gein. He was a part-time farmer, part-time handyman. Sometimes he worked for the county cleaning the brush out of ditches. He was always in and out of the store, and Warden recalled that the short, slight man had run true to form in the past week. Ed had asked the previous day whether or not Frank was going hunting. and when Frank said yes, Ed had said he'd probably be back on Saturday to buy antifreeze. Frank hadn't asked why Ed didn't want to buy it there and then. Probably Ed didn't have the money for it, or he had other errands to run the next day. It was none of Frank's business. Frank promptly forgot about it until now, when he had the bill in his hand. Warden called the county sheriff's department. The dispatcher told Frank to stay put while somebody went over to the Gein farmstead a couple of miles west of Plainfield to have a look-see. Warden agreed, believing his mother could show up at any time, but as he gazed at the stain on the floor, his hopes began to falter. He noticed that there was a small trail of fluid leading to the back door of the store, leading out to the yard, stopping where the panel truck should have been. Frank was now thinking the worst. At the sheriff's department, the dispatcher was trying to scare up a radio car that might already be in the Plainfield area. It was a busy weekend, and in times like that, the neighbouring counties cooperated on calls. So it was because of that a deputy from adjacent Wood County found himself on Highway 73, bound for the Gein farmstead. At the same time, County Sheriff Art Sheely was headed for a rural store a couple of miles west of Plainfield. Sheely knew that Gein was a friend of the store's owner, ran errands for him, frequently visited him and his family, and quite possibly could be found there. Sheely was going to arrest him on an open charge because of what Frank Warden had found. Gein was in fact there and had just finished supper when the sheriff rolled up. Sheely apprised Gein of the situation, of the bill and missing register and the fluid. Gein merely smiled and said he didn't know anything about it, but agreed willingly to accompany the sheriff to the farm. As the two entered the car, the sheriff got word that the Warden panel truck had been found in Plainfield Lovers Lane, a wooded section just east of the village. Blood had been found in the back. The Wood County deputy pulled in at the Gein farm. It was a lonely spot set back from the road. If the land had not been covered by a crust of frozen sterile snow, the fields would have been revealed as lying fallow and choked with weeds. Gein's house was not exactly ramshackle on the outside, but it was getting there. It reflected the owner's poverty with its plastic sheet outer storm windows, its faded and thin paint, its general look of disrepair. The outbuildings, a barn, a chicken coop, equipment shed, a summer kitchen abutting the house looked ready for collapse. Outside the house, a fresh-cut cord of wood was the only recent sign that somebody did indeed live inside. The deputy knocked on the door and got no reply. He knocked again, nothing. He decided to look around, shined the flashlight through the kitchen window, saw vague outlines of things that should be in kitchens. Tried shining his light through the summer kitchen window right next to it. What he saw would never leave his memory. It was the body of a woman, hanging by its heels, eviscerated, decapitated, dripping blood into a tub beneath it. He couldn't be sure, but the deputy thought he saw a head on the floor near the tub on some paper. The deputy emptied his stomach right there, then stumbled to the car. He called for help. Sheely got the car on the road and quickly drove over to the farm. Gein remained in a mostly silent but cooperative state, disavowing any knowledge of Bernice Warden's whereabouts. He seemed not to understand just exactly what was going on, and when he and Sheely reached the farm, he apparently gave his permission for Sheely and the deputy to enter the house. The home had no electricity, so the men used flashlights, moving through the surrounding dark, listening to mice running in the rafters. They quickly ascertained that the body in the summer kitchen was indeed Mrs. Warden's, and they found other things. On the kitchen table was a cup. It held 4 notes. With mounting horror, they opened an insulated icebox and found various human organs, livers and lungs wrapped in butcher's paper. The parlour wall revealed 9 death masks of women, their facial skin tanned and mounted. The sheriff recognized one of them straight away. It was the face of a woman named Mary Hogan, who had disappeared from her rural tavern in nearby Portage County in 1954. The second men were ready to get the hell out of there, but Sheely played his light around one last time and found a pair of human lips dangling from a string attached to a window shade. Back in Wautoma, with Gein locked in a cell, the sheriff called for help from neighbouring counties and from the State County Crime Laboratory in Madison. His neighbours would go through their files and inform him of missing persons. The crime lab would determine who was who and just what had gone on in Gein's abattoir. Sheely figured he hadn't found everything at the house, and he was so right. The lab brought along a generator to shed light through the house and spent all weekend straight through, no breaks, at the farmstead. This was not going unnoticed. The radio calls to Wood County alerted the editor of a Marshfield weekly newspaper, who notified Led Baining, a general assignment reporter. There was something big going on in Washoe County. Baining cursed his Saturday night luck, got his 4x5 press camera, and left for Watoma, where he was rerouted to the Gein farm. He was the first reporter on the scene, and besides the police photographers was the only man to take photographs of the entire hellish scene. Shortly after his little tour, all reporters and other non-officials were kept off the premises. It didn't really matter that he was able to take those photographs. They never saw print. He expected that, and he also knew that his newspaper would confiscate the film he shot. But years later, the memories were still fresh. If it were up to him, the newspaper would have confiscated those too. When I got there, the place was crawling with state troopers and county boys. They all seemed to be in a state of shock, he said. Those were guys who were used to highway accidents and shot up deer hunters. They all seemed to huddle together in small groups waiting for the lab to arrive. They didn't say much. I asked for permission to go inside, and someone had just told me, "Go see for yourself." So I did, and I went back outside and fell sick. The cops had discovered a lot of human bones in the basement and around 30 pint jars of blood. Some of the blood was human, but more of it came from deer. Downstairs there were quart jars with kidneys, livers, intestinal parts, all that kind of thing. Those turned out to be human, preserved in formaldehyde. I took pictures of everything. The kitchen and his bedroom were the only parts of his house that he used much, plus that summer kitchen. All the time I was in there, I kept hearing mice above me. The light was very poor. I wanted to get the hell out and stay out forever. They said that Frank Warden was going to identify the remains officially when they removed Mrs. Warden to the funeral parlour. I kept thinking about how terrible it would be for him. It's strange, but I think that sort of thing sort of kept my mind off where I was and what I was shooting. Besides the body, I think the stuff in the kitchen was the worst we found. The masks were pretty bad, but they found what they thought was a human heart in a coffee can on the stove. I certainly don't dwell on it, but I've sure as hell never forgotten anything that I saw that day. As the laboratory unit began its methodical search of the entire farmstead, Ed Gein was undergoing an exhaustive 30-hour questioning in Watoma. The store's cash register had been found in Gein's house, as was the cash box from the Mary Hogan case 3 years earlier. Confronted with the massive evidence against him, Gein at first admitted no knowledge of the Warden or Hogan cases. At last he said he knew something about all the bodies. He said he was unsure if he killed Mrs. Warden, but admitted that he had butchered her. Asked if he had planned to eat the body, he said he didn't remember. Asked if he had killed the other people found on his farm, he said, "If you say I did." The lab unit kept discovering and identifying objects at the farm. In the bedroom, human skin bracelets were found on a dresser. There was skin covering chairs and lampshades, and strips of it adorned the walls. They found the tops of 2 skulls, which had been sawed off just above the eyes, and which inverted had apparently been used as soup bowls. Most shocking of all was the suit in the closet. It was made of skin, a vest and coat made from a woman's torso with matching leggings. The suit resembled buckskin, but it wasn't. There were parts of at least 12 humans around that farm. Under questioning by Washoe County District Attorney Earl Kylene and his staff, Gein could not be budged from his statement about the other bodies. His grudging statement was that he had killed the 10 others if you say I did, and that wasn't good enough to satisfy anybody. Just who were the recipients of the 51-year-old bachelor's grisly skill? It was a haunting question in Plainfield back then, and it remains so today. In a general sense, the answers would eventually come from Ed. Other general answers concerning why the man had done these deeds came from the battery of psychiatric tests he underwent, but very few specifics came to light, and so an odour of mystery still sensed the case. The simple fact is, Plainfield didn't want to know everything. There are good reasons for this. Plainfield felt, and feels to this day, violated by what Ed Gein did and by the notoriety the village got in the following years. There is something of a community-wide feeling of guilt mixed in with this. On reflection, there were signs that something was amiss with Ed Gein, but the signs were ignored, and those signs are easy to see after the fact. The traditional interviews of a mass murderer's neighbours always reveal that the killer was a peaceful but strange duck, kept to himself, quiet, polite, a nice guy in every way, except when he occasionally ate dirt and grew fangs when the moon was full. In Gein's case, the signs were subtle, pointing to no more than just basic strangeness. In small towns, eccentricity may be laughed at, and it will absolutely be commented upon, but generally the opening cliché is live and let live, and even so Plainfield felt guilt. But first there was shock. Nobody could believe all that was revealed. Sensational crimes, and they rarely came more sensational than this, happened elsewhere. Plainfield, after all, was like Lake Wobegon, filled with sunny, gently humorous rustic folk who overheld the traditional values. These revelations were impossible, and even if it had happened here, who would believe that it was one of the resident bachelor farmers who did it, a basically harmless aging man like Ed Gein? Gein was a native of La Crosse, the son of an unprosperous tannery worker who moved the family to Plainfield when Ed was 8 years old. Ed's father died in 1940. Ed and his older brother Henry were confirmed bachelors at this time, so the two, along with their mother, continued to work the hard-scramble farm. It was a full-time job, and none of the family strayed far from the homestead. In fact, the furthest Ed had ever been from Plainfield was the 130-mile distance to Milwaukee, where he had gone once for a draft physical at the beginning of World War II and been rejected as unfit. His travels were documented by authorities throughout the state and nation, who had hoped to clear some of the more mysterious missing persons case by tying them to Ed. They found they couldn't, because Gein never left Washura or surrounding counties. The mother kept both of her boys close. She had a strong personality, as was necessary in order to keep the place going through the perpetual economic hard times the family was always fighting. In order to keep body and soul together, Henry did a little trapping and sometimes acted as a guide. Ed at one time had a dream of becoming a doctor, but became a handyman instead. They all poked at the earth to snatch from it enough food from the family's subsistence and no more. The question of whether the family should have just dumped the farm to try something different somewhere else occasionally came up in family discussions, but the idea was always squelched by the old lady. To her, the farm was home, poor as it was. There was no other place like it, and if it was God's will that the Geins must live in poverty, then so be it. The old woman dominated her sons. She tried to convince or intimidate both of them into not consorting with women. She only partially succeeded with Henry, who did a bit of socializing. Henry met his end fighting a marsh fire during the dry summer of 1944, getting trapped in the middle of a stretch of tinder-like tall grass. The flames raced and swirled, fed by a hot wind, and Henry died. The brothers had been close. Henry had been a stabilizing influence on Ed, and perhaps let him know through words and deeds that their mother did not have the answers to everything. After Henry's death, Mrs. Gein repeated to Ed that the women in the area had loose morals, and she added something new. One of them had somehow been responsible for what had happened to Henry. She said it so often that Ed began to believe her. In 1945, Mrs. Gein suffered 2 strokes that incapacitated her. Ed cared for her as best as he could, never leaving her side and serving her every need. By the end of 1945 she was dead, and Ed Gein found himself alone and forlorn on an isolated and primitive farm in Plainfield. He had always been reclusive anyway, and that was nothing particularly out of the ordinary for Plainfield. There are a number of semi-hermetic, self-employed, poverty-stricken people around. If nothing else, the one thing Plainfield always offered was seclusion, and there were and are small-town codes of conduct that help buttress seclusion. There was tavern and back-fence gossip for sure. What else was there to do? But there was little real meddling in the affairs of others. You generally did not go visiting without being invited, and you did not pry too much into somebody else's business. So Gein went on his own little way, going quietly mad in the privacy of his dark farmhouse. He rapidly gained a reputation for being odd. Now that he was alone, he stopped farming. It would come out later that he felt a great sense of despair at this time. He was overwhelmed by the responsibility of trying to keep up with the never-ending chores of a farm, and then he felt guilty when he let the farm slip into disrepair. He kept a small garden, and that was all. He boarded off his mother's room and kept it inviolate. When the discoveries were made, by far the cleanest room in the house was the old lady's. Even though it hadn't been used for 12 years, it had become a shrine. He became a handyman and was given part-time work with the county, a jack of all trades and master of none. He was always taciturn, but he was congenial enough to be asked around to hang windows for widows and paint buildings for those who had the money to hire someone. He even did a little babysitting. He was regarded as a pleasant little man who tried to help. After his ambitions to become a doctor were thwarted, he took a strong interest in taxidermy. The only thing was, he never took any mounting jobs from hunters and fishermen, who helped make the area what it was and who could be counted on to furnish money for a job of work. Yet he had all the special tools he needed, ordered from a catalogue, and he was enthusiastic about any book that contained information about anatomy, animal or human. This is where a telling sign enters the history. One time Gein was babysitting a local kid at his farm. With its boarded-off room, its strange occupant, and no electric lights, the Gein house had gained a reputation for being haunted. The kid felt uneasy being there, and would claim that Gein showed him 2 shrunken heads, saying that Gein swore him to secrecy. From that time onwards, none of the Plainfield kids wanted to go near Ed Gein. When the boy told his parents about it, they refused to believe him and told him off for spreading stories. But there was gossip. A Plainfield woman who knew the tale said she was once a visitor at Ed Gein's house. As a joke, she pointed to a closed door and asked Ed if that's where he kept the shrunken heads. Gein just looked at me funny, and that's understandable. Even if Gein had nothing to hide, he could probably be forgiven for looking funny at somebody for asking such a question, wouldn't you? The fact that Ed, in retrospect, did have grounds to look that way is part of the reason that Plainfield feels guilt today. As the days after the discovery wore on, and the truth began to come out, the citizens felt that something should have been done years before. All the parts of human bodies at Gein's house were from women. Gein had killed 2 of them, Mrs. Hogan and Mrs. Warden, and the rest had come from grave robbing excursions he made between 1946 and apparently 1952. The information that follows came out over a number of years at Gein's various hearings and trials. It seems that after his mother died, and feeling helpless over the condition of the farm, Gein felt extremely depressed and disconsolate. To feel better, he would visit the old lady's grave at any time of day or night. He began to retreat into a fantasy world, and came to believe that he could restore his mother to life. It was at this time that he began robbing graves of women about his mother's age and physical type. He would read obituary columns to find fresh corpses, and said he travelled over 3 counties in his search. He would then put the bodies in his 1946 Ford or a pickup truck and take them home, and then he would experiment. He said that he was sometimes assisted by an aging farmer recluse, but that the man had been committed to a home for the elderly. He said he was aware that what he was doing was not right. He used to pray for strength to resist the compulsion to rob graves. Sometimes the Lord answered his prayers while he was in the act of digging, and Ed would then replace the disturbed ground and leave. Around 1952, he said, he finally stopped those excursions. The skin suit helped him to become his mother. He told the doctors that he sometimes wore the suit at night, covering himself with it, lacing it to his body, donning his mother's clothes and talking to her. He felt a degree of comfort then. We had long, long conversations, he said. I missed her. I would stay in the house at times like that, and I would sit in her favourite rocker. The doctors said that Gein admitted to them that he wanted a sex change operation so he could become even closer, in his mind, to his mother. Perhaps the suits helped stop him robbing graves, but it did not stop him from becoming a murderer. In 1954, he and a companion were returning to Plainfield from an errand in Portage County. They stopped in a Pine River tavern for a beer. The bartender was the proprietor, who was Mary Hogan, and she bore a resemblance to Gein's mother. Gein was transfixed and returned alone late that night. He roused Hogan from her house, and when he answered her door, he shot her with a small-bore rifle. She apparently died instantly. Just like the others, he took her to his house for experiments. But unlike the others, this time he had a fresh corpse. Gein said he saved some parts of the body and burned the rest, but the psychiatrists and law officials didn't think so, and at this point they believe Gein became both a necrophiliac and a cannibal. Mrs. Warden's case was a little different. He had been acquainted with her for years, but on the morning of November the 16th, he drove to the hardware store and saw the dressed-out deer hanging in the filling station across the street, and in the words of his defense attorney, went wild. He entered the store, put a bullet he said he happened to have with him into another small-bore rifle, and shot Mrs. Warden behind the left ear. After that, he said he didn't recall anything. Apparently in a fog, he replaced the rifle, locked the store, dragged her body and then the cash register to the store's panel truck, and went home and eviscerated her like a deer. He then left the panel truck in Plainfield's wooded parking lane for Neckers. He either ignored or had not seen the bill of sale, and it was his downfall. After 11 years he would be finally caught. In 1957, not all of those answers were available immediately, and the possibilities about what really happened were endless. Had he killed them all? Eaten them all? By Monday the 18th, the word had spread. The news had rattled the complacency of America. Here was, by definition, a ghoul, and the networks, the wire services, the magazines and newspapers all converged on Little Plainfield. The media felt that the Gein story would capture America's imagination, and you certainly can't fault their news judgment. America wanted to know the facts. The crimes were simply too enormous, too disgusting, too titillating to allow anyone to shake Ed Gein off as yet another simple madman. And in the end, Ed Gein would become America's bogeyman. That, as I said, was from Death Rattle, issue 7, volume 2, published by Kitchen Sink, and was written by, sorry, just a second, Dave Schreiner. So yeah, thank you for listening. That was an essay on Ed Gein in preparation for the upcoming book. Did you hear what Eddie Gein did? This has been the Mondo Murder Party. I've been Filthy Nevs. Thank you very much for watching, and if I can remember how to do this on Facebook. There you go. Okay, so as we say, thanks for watching. Dial M for motherfucker. This has been Mondo Murder Party, and I am out of here.